and they found that the impact from Brexit was twice the size of COVID. But instead of talking about these high-level factors, let's talk about people's day-to-day experience. When they go and try and travel or work in the EU, they're much more limited than they were before. And this is because of Brexit, not because of any other factor.
British people don't like being subjugated, and they do like to have their own laws made by their own members of parliament, and also certainly not behind closed doors without even a transcript. And I've been on the European Scrutiny Committee, the Select Committee in the House of Commons, since 1985. I was chairman for 14 years until I retired from Parliament last week or a few weeks ago. And basically, I put it to the people in the House of Commons several times. Do you prefer to have your own parliament with your own voters making their decisions through you? Or do you want it done behind closed doors by the Council of Ministers without a transcript? And nobody dared to reply once, because the point is, in a nutshell, yes, I knew the British people would not want to remain subjugated to laws made by other countries. Although we want to try and work fairly well as far as we can with all other countries in the world.
Okay. I mean, I remember going out and about quite a bit, speaking to various people. And I do remember, I think, funny enough, it was actually on John Pienaar's radio show when he was on 5 Live and we were on a commentators panel. He went around saying, what do you think the result's going to be? And I think myself and one other person said, and I was, full disclosure, I was very much for Remain, but I said, I think we are going to leave, because I had been out door knocking and the conversations I was having. And I remember being in the sort of spin room that night, Mike, at ITV, with some very prominent commentators, and everyone's lashing into the red wine and everything, saying, deal, it's going to be really easy. Remain's going to win. We'll be home by probably 1. This is going to be a very easy. And I said, I'm not sure of that. And I remember a very senior commentator taking me aside going, you're new to this game. I don't think you understand how it works. There's absolutely no way that the Brexiteers are going to win this. Cut to, what did you feel that, you were on the Remain side, did you think that the Brexiteers were going to win?
Yes, I did. And one of my early experiences from campaigning in that referendum, because I set up Scientists for You at the time, being in science policy, and we all within the science community, well, almost all, 90%, thought that Brexit would be very bad news for British science. I remember a lot of friends telling me, it's great that you're doing this thing in politics, Mike, but no one's going to vote Brexit, are they? And I would say, well, look at you not getting involved, not paying attention, because I am spending day after day on social media actually engaging with Brexiteers who are telling me, I can't believe you're for Remain. Everyone I know is for Brexit where I live. And so I was seeing the two sides of it, the very engaged Brexiteers who were tweeting and Facebook posting every day and getting really involved, and the Remain side that was kind of taking it for granted.
And quite complacent.
Yeah, very complacent. And I felt they were very complacent about our values as well that we were protecting in all of this, or trying to protect in all of this. And I think David Cameron also thought that it'd be a bit of a cakewalk as well. He said that to his European counterparts. So on the actual evening itself, I was very nervous about all of this. I was actually at the Stronger In watch party reception. I remember walking in, and the head of the Stronger In campaign, it was Will Straw, pulled me over and said, Mike, we've got some new polls in, and it's looking like we've just edged it, so we're quietly confident. And I was like, okay.
Well,
but it didn't go that way during the evening.
And look, it's a reminder to all of us who follow politics closely. I mean, sometimes the polls do not always get it right, and sometimes, conventional wisdom from the commentators and the great and the good do not always get it right. Well, look, let's just go back to sort of where things are now. So, Bill, how do you think Brexit is going?
Well, my own view is, and I've been in Parliament for 40 years, I've watched the whole progress of this from the beginning, but actually I think it's going very well. And the reason I say that is because of a number of factors which, despite COVID, because COVID came in very, very soon afterwards when things were just bedding down. Remember, we actually only left, I think it was the 31st of January 2020. And almost immediately after the general election, which took place very shortly after 2019, December the 13th, I think it was, we got struck by COVID. and March was a terrible month, and so it went on. And that did enormous damage. It cost £400 billion throughout the COVID period. And that put us back. And then on top of that, we had the Ukraine war with the energy costs, the increase in the cost of living, the increase in the mortgage rates. I mean, you couldn't have a worse couple of things happening, and big things. I mean, some people have even suggested, I've heard it said, that the cost of COVID was as much as the Second World War. So for practical purposes, we have achieved a great deal against a very significant.
Okay, but you, despite all of those mitigating factors, you still think it's going well. And what are your sort of proof points for why you think it's going well? Quite a lot of my listeners, I'll read out a couple of comments soon, but they're messaging in saying that they don't feel it's going very well. But what are your proof points for why you think it's going well?
Well, first of all, as I said at the very beginning, we've now regained our self-government, we've regained our sovereignty, and we've gained our ability to make our own laws on behalf of the electors who vote for us. And I explained before how the Council of Ministers operates. Now, that's a constitutional question, but it's a very important one, because after all, it's about who governs the country and how they're governed. Now, the second thing I would say is that in terms of economic performance, actually, relatively speaking, we've done, I mean, look at the situation in Germany and France at the moment. I mean, the IMF are saying that we're liable to overtake France and Germany really quite soon. And on top of that, we have an unemployment rate of only 4%. Inflation is now down at 2%. We have
it did shoot up. Remember, though, it did shoot up to 11%.
But you said a mitigating question. No, it's not mitigating. It's not something that slightly altered. COVID was a profound, total disaster for the world and for Europe. And Germany is now more or less deindustrializing. It's having a very bad time. It's in an bad place. That's why, if I may say just quickly, Macron going to call an election, could protest, for example, in Toulouse and places. Disaster.
Well, I mean, many of my listeners may say that Rishi Sunak has called an election very early as well for because he's struggling. But look, so Mike, we've heard Sir Bill Cash's view that he thinks Brexit has gone well. There are other factors that have played in: COVID, Ukraine. What are your views?
Well, I think that what we just listened to is entirely removed from the lived experiences of the working population here. I mean, there have been analyses of Brexit that strip out Ukraine and strip out COVID, and they found that the impact from Brexit was twice the size of COVID. But instead of talking about these high-level factors, let's talk about people's day-to-day experience. When they go and try and travel or work in the EU, they're much more limited than they were before. And this is because of Brexit, not because of any other factor. Our businesses trying to trade with Europe, with their partners that they traded before, have more paperwork on top of them. They can cost up the hours and the costs of that paperwork. That isn't Ukraine. That isn't COVID. No, Bill, you talked for a long time, so I'm going to finish. These are all very tangible, real experiences that people feel eating into their lives, and they come from Brexit. So on the point of sovereignty, because a lot of Brexiteers have now said, okay, so it hasn't helped immigration so far. We can't prove that it's helped anything in the economy. Certainly hasn't helped your freedom of movement or musicians trying to travel, but sovereignty. We've got our sovereignty. What does sovereignty mean? That's the key question for me. And could you give me just 30 seconds to let you know?
30 seconds. I've got so many messages coming through.
Okay. Sovereignty is the power to make decisions about your own life or your own country. When we were in the EU, we invested some of our sovereignty in people's ability to travel and work in other countries, in our businesses to trade freely. With Brexit, we saw sovereignty shrinkage. We pulled that all back to a government for them to make decisions, and they haven't used it to do anything useful at all. It's been a waste of sovereignty, whereas EU membership was a much better investment of sovereignty.
Okay. Now, so many messages are coming through. I'm going to just read out a couple of messages. Sam's messaged in saying Brexit anniversary. I mean, he's very angry, Bill. He says Bill Cash, Farage and their ilk should be brought up for fraud charges. They've helped to ruin the lives of most people in this country. They promised us the moon. Hang on, Bill, let me just finish the message. I'll just read a few messages and I promise I will come back to you because I want to hear what you've got to say. They promised us the moon and unicorns and instead delivered the same trade deals we'd had before and a few additional ones on disastrous terms for our own home industry and agriculture. They've given us extra inflation, low growth and made us poorer. Brexit's a disaster. We need to rejoin the EU and regain freedoms. Someone else has met. Well, let's do it.
Sorry.
Kevin's message in saying stop with the excuses. We all know about COVID and the lack of planning, despite knowing that Putin was a threat. Someone else has messaged in saying this whole sovereignty thing is so pathetic. A cursory glance at the barriers in place for business and public to the EU. Just even trying to go on holiday or taking your pets is now a nightmare. I'll never forgive or forget. Someone else has said, Bill, you don't speak to me. You won by a tiny majority that could be comfortably reversed now. You've got to be willfully blind to not see it at this stage. So, Bill, you get a lot. Honestly, my listeners are very upset about it. What would you say to some of the messages you've heard in? Because people are very upset. And also, when you look at some of the polls, a lot of people want to rejoin.
I would say you read out a lot of Remainers' messages.
There haven't been any. Honestly, if you're a Brexiteer, please message in. Do please message in. Carry on, Bill.
Just let me give you some ONS data. For example, this shows that the exports to the rest of the world are up by 54% and services are up by 74%. That actually demonstrates, these are ONS figures. Can I simply say, I mean, you know, the impact of the cost of living, I'm not underestimating it at all, or for that matter, the problems that people have had with mortgages and various other things. What I am saying, however, is that if you look at the actual data of the trade deals, for example, the removal of 192 business barriers to trade in 79 countries, we're removing and improving our relations with trade relations with Japan, Singapore, Australia, New Zealand. India is on the brink. We've got Mexican deals coming up as well.
We haven't got that big trade deal with America yet, have we?
That is true, and I think that is partly the consequence of the fact that the Americans have got at the moment a lot of issues of their own, and I think that the politics of America at the moment are very difficult. But I can say for sure that as far as we're concerned in this country, our GDP is actually doing pretty well. And as I said, unemployment at 4%, inflation 2%. These are not bad signs at all. In fact, they're extremely good. And compared to other parts of Europe, where there are massive problems, we're actually doing comparatively if not very well.
Let me put that to Mike now. I mean, there are some political scientists, Mike, who say it is possibly too early to get the full extent of Brexit because of these other factors as well. I mean, I have seen that from a number of, including people like Jonathan, Portes, who, is not an ardent Brexiteer or anything. Would you give any concession to that argument that actually maybe Kemi Badenoch today is saying we're not really going to know, it's going to take like 10 or 20 years to see the full effect. Is there any merit in that argument?
There is, but from what angle are you looking at it? Do you think we should be giving more time in order to see benefits, and they can't even tell us what those benefits are going to be? Or do you think we need more time in order to see how bad it is? There's a principle when you're doing clinical studies, which is if you're running a clinical study and you're seeing that the drug is not giving you the effect that you want, but there are significant side effects causing damage, then you pull the plug on it. And I think many people think that with Brexit, we're at a stage where we can see the damage. There isn't promise of good stuff coming through, so we should pull the plug on it. But I'd like to say just one more thing, which is I know data, Bill, because I am a scientist and I've done big data for a long time, and I know how you can present different angles on data.
Now, we've had lots of messages having a go at Bill. We have had a message having a go at you now, Mike, as well,
Excellent.
for full
Let's
balance.
hear it.
Someone's messaging saying, Jonathan van Dulwich says, oh God, Mike Galsworthy is a fanatical Remainer. There is no objectivity, just preaching. We voted for Brexit and a huge part of the political establishment tried to thwart it. Listen to Bill Cash's data, which is objective and constructive, unlike you, Aisha, or Mike. That's Jonathan. And Graham's messaging saying, is that sad Ramona suggesting free movement is what we need? Look how Europe is voting now. So look, on that point about Europe, Mike, a lot of people have actually been slightly put off by closer ties with Europe, looking at this rise of far-right populism sweeping through Europe right now.
I mean, you've got that wherever you go. Look at our own country, look at the States.
But it's not, we haven't got anyone in Parliament yet.
Yes. Well, some would make arguments about the last government that we just had in and some of Bill's contemporaries. However, with the European elections, you actually saw that what we had before is the centre-right party in first place, then the lefty party in second place, and then, if you will, the Lib Dems in third place, and it stayed that way. So the main EPP party actually put on more votes than did the far right parties that are in, or the further right parties that are in groups. But then you've got AFD and others joining, and they haven't paired up with anyone. But overall, the balance of power has largely stayed the same. And if you look at Poland, that went left, if you look at a lot of the Scandinavian countries that went left, when you've got 27 countries together, it tends to balance out on the whole. Okay. And that's one of the nice things of having that multifaceted Europe. It tends to balance out.
Well, look, Stephen's messaging saying the political class didn't want Brexit. Labour made it as difficult as possible. And if they get in, they will try to rejoin by the back door. How dare people make up their own minds? You're second guessing what the result would be now if politicians cared more about how good the country is doing and less about their ideology. That's from Stephen.
Did he just say, how dare people make up their own minds?
I think he was saying that in terms of Remainers sort of patronising and people who'd made up their own minds about Brexit. But look, so Bill, can I come back to you? Because look,
so another example, because this is really important stuff. We're not just talking about the economy, important as that is, and it's very, very important. We're actually doing, as I've said, I've given the figures, comparatively good by compared to Europe, which is doing better. European trade is falling off a cliff. They're very, very worried in Europe about the extent to which the international trade deals, which they of course control, actually are not working. They're getting less and less of a percentage than they were before. But let me give an example of something on a social issue. For example, the online safety bill. Now, there's a thing called the European Online Services Act, I think it's called, and they brought in their proposals. We out of the EU brought in ours. We are not, therefore, obviously, because we've left, constrained by their laws. We do it on our own terms in our own parliament. Online safety is a massive social problem. The fact is that there are children who are, and young people who are committing suicide.
And Bill, we have covered that a lot in our show. We have covered that. I'm just conscious about time.
I just want to make this one point. We have brought in proposals for 2 years imprisonment for big tech bosses. That is really putting a tremendous matter of importance on the whole issue.
Okay, well,
the big tech bosses do not want that. They pay fines. They can get rid of the money.
Okay, Bill. Well, so you're citing that as a Brexit benefit. Let's see.
Just one. I mean, there are so many.
Okay, let's see what happens with that. Look, by the way, people are reading Dan's messaging saying, thank you for doing this discussion on the effects of Brexit. Well done, everybody. Look, Mike, I just want to just move the conversation on slightly. Quite a few people are messaging in saying no political parties are talking about it, and shouldn't Labour be saying more about Brexit? Keir Starmer was a Remainer. What do you think Labour will do if they win?
Oh, now that's a big question. To quickly address what Bill just said,
very briefly, because we only got a few minutes,
about the big data stuff, that's great. And in the EU, they've actually got jail sentences for polluters now, big polluting companies. Hey, we should get together. That's how the whole thing is meant to work. But on Labour, yes, they should be talking more about Brexit. We all know why they don't at the moment.
And they want
They don't want to
growth.
spook
They
the
want
horses.
growth.
But yeah, getting into the next parliament, their responsibilities change. Right now, Keir Starmer's responsibility is to win a general election, and he will. He knows the data, he knows the polls, he knows what people are saying their priorities are for the constituencies that he wants to target. Fine. But should he get into power, his responsibilities change dramatically the very next day. And his responsibilities are to British citizens, British businesses, and the whole country. And our businesses will be crying out for getting rid of that Brexit red tape and getting back in. And our citizens will be crying out to free up opportunities to be working in Europe, traveling in Europe more freely, and so forth and so on. So things are going to change when he gets in power, for sure, because of the business and public pressure for him to do so.